with that, then I call to order the February 3rd, 2025 meeting of the City of Erie's Historic Review Commission. Our first order of business is roll call. So Commissioner Falcone is here. Commissioner Brennan? Here. Do we have Commissioner Meyer? Here. Commissioner Pepper is absent at the moment. Commissioner Tenenbaum is absent as well. With us, we have a few other people joining. I don't think that we have Jason, do we? No? And then Director Spry, as I called you out of the room, thank you. And then I think we also have with us Assistant Planner Moore in the audience. Hi. All right then, next order of business is public comment. Do we have anyone that wishes to speak? Seeing none, we'll move forward. Approval of past minutes and certificate of appropriateness report. Now this looks a little different, I think, than our last agenda. I did want to explain that the certificate of appropriateness report was put in kind of in anticipation of future COAs coming through. Yes? Yeah, all right, no worries. So as part of our regular meetings in the future, we'll need to carve out time specifically for over-the-counter COAs that have gone through our staff. So to build it into our agenda now, we have it, even though we have none, I assume. So with that, we have no COAs to approve, but we do have our minutes from January. So did everybody have the opportunity to review minutes, and are there any comments?
Yes, no questions or comments here.
None here. This will be an easy meeting. Then may I have a motion to approve our minutes from January 6, 2025?
I'll make a motion to approve the meeting minutes.
Is there a second?
I was going to say, in this case, I would say...
I will second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Minutes are approved. Do we have any correspondence from the public? Nope. Okay, thank you. Then moving on to old business, we have, first off, a review and discussion of criteria for designation in Article 7, Historic Resource Protection. And for that, I defer to Director Spry.
And I'm going to defer to Melinda Myers because, wasn't this your suggestion that we discuss this during... Yes. Okay, so if you could just maybe around the comments that you made during your review on this section, if you could just let the HRC know what the discussion you wanted to have was.
Oh, certainly. Having reviewed multiple ordinances, both statewide and nationwide, it looks as if communities all across the country establish criteria differently, right? Some of them simply repeat the criteria of the National Register. I'm sorry, I didn't think you really wanted to hear me. Some people simply repeat the four criteria of the National Register in their ordinance, right? And those are the criteria that are used to evaluate local nominations for local designation. Others have closer to 20, right, listed. So it varies greatly. And so I think I simply wanted a discussion about the criteria because I think in what was proposed, I think that there was a proposal, right? So there were criteria that had been inserted into the Article 7 at the time. I'm assuming Pittsburgh has been removed. At the time that I reviewed, Pittsburgh was still listed as the city. Just a minor edit, but I guess from my perspective, I offered a second alternative, which again relies more heavily on the National Register criteria. But I think, I don't know, I guess I would love to have a discussion because I would love to make it as broad as possible because I think that even if we were to narrow it to the 4 criteria of the National Register, which is not necessarily what I countered with, but it was, right, it still relies heavily on the language of the National Register. We don't necessarily need to interpret that the way the National Park Service interprets the National Register criteria. What I did like about having or using either those 4 broad criteria or some version of them is that they are a catch-all. The more I dug into the criteria where there were 20 criteria listed or 12 criteria listed, it's like, well, is there a way that we can summarize this so that our criteria is shorter, but is also flexible enough to catch everything that we want it to catch? And so that's why simply I just proposed a shorter revision of what was presented, and that's yeah. The one thing that I did appreciate with again what has potentially been used by the City of Pittsburgh Historic Review Commission is the explanation of what broad themes of history are. So right in the National Register, it simply classifies or provides a definition of broad themes of history, which can be educational, can be industry, can be culture, can be, right, social. So I actually did like the inclusion of some of those broad themes, although I would hate to limit us to just those that we could list in that definition. So that's kind of where I was at, and I don't even know if Dave has read the different proposed iterations of the criteria. So Matthew, I know that you've looked at them carefully, so I'm just going to leave that at that. I thought it would be good for us to really talk through what we wanted to institute for the criteria for local designation. And again, I'm just going to end this with, I like our broad categories so that we can catch as much as possible with our categories.
And not limit ourselves.
Right. I worry, so those cities that do like the 20, I worry that they are so specific, right? They've really gone above and beyond defining so specifically what will meet the criteria that it is in some ways limiting. I suspect that they chose, 15, 12, 20 criteria because they wanted to catch everything, but in specifically defining everything, they've also created a narrowness for the criteria that has the potential to exclude. So that's all it was. I like, what I do like about the National Register is that it's 4 short criteria, and they are so incredibly broad, we can interpret them in many different ways. That's it.
And I think that some of the language, I have the edited version of this, and just on the, I believe that these are Kathy Rosdeck's comments, the consultant that prepared and helped us with these amendments, stated that more definitions are used here could provide greater flexibility. Fewer definitions with broader language, as with the NR, could provide greater clarity. Just FYI, Pittsburgh is considering consolidating these into a smaller number. So it looks like on the flip side of that argument, fewer definitions with broader language is providing more clarity? Is that what is that what Kathy is saying here?
That's what Kathy wrote.
Yeah, that's what Kathy wrote, right. And other comments were to leave them in, that they provide more clarity and it's wise to leave them in. So it seems like it was more consensus was to leave more of the items in for the criteria, leave them in than taking them out. Because there was some suggestion of reducing it to 4, but I don't know if there was consensus around that. I think that was kind of the discussion for today.
That's actually why yes. That's why I asked for discussion, yeah.
And also the designation of public interior portion. I don't think that we had ever come to the HRC had not necessarily made a decision at the last meeting as to whether or not that would be included in the amendments.
I think at the last meeting, we talked about not presently. It is something that the HRC can consider at a future date, but if we're looking at both the capacity of city staff as well as the capacity of the HRC,
Okay, yes, I remember that.
Interior spaces is something to be considered at a future date. Not that it's ruled off the table, just not now.
That was my understanding as well, and to have, I think, more conversations with Philadelphia's HRC that I think has that in their ordinance.
I do recall that, thank you. I'm sure it's in the minutes, that we would be reaching out to Philadelphia and asking to have some conversations around that, yes, okay.
I think it's a good point about consolidation that you make. I think that one of the reasons municipalities tend to have such a laundry list is I think that they're looking to make it as defensible as possible when issues come up around designations. And I also think that they try to make it as kind of plain language as possible, because I know that especially with the way that the criteria are written for the National Register, it is really broad and vague, and to the point where someone who doesn't necessarily work in the field might not be able to understand exactly what is being said. I would agree that I think that we need to maybe go through the criteria and kind of one by one see where there's opportunities to consolidate. So there are kind of common themes as represented, which will probably get us closer to how things are written with the Secretary of the Interior's guidelines. But I wonder if that's perhaps best to be done kind of offline, when working with specific criteria like that, going through and kind of providing comments like was done with a consultant might be good for us as a group.
Oh, yeah.
And we could present them at our next meeting. But I do want to check as well, because I know that we're interested in kind of moving things forward expediently on the revisions. Would that be too much of an imposition for the city to kind of wait another month?
Well, we could hold a special meeting, as we've done in the past, and then hopefully, be able to maybe approve the amendments at the following meeting if we wanted to expedite things a little bit faster.
What say you two?
I think that's a fine approach. I think in this forum, it's very difficult to discuss, right, to actually work through the details. So I would be in favor of a special meeting. And so I'll make a motion.
Just another quick question before we make a motion. Again, I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel on a lot of this. Is there a better description out there? Because I think you said we're looking at Pittsburgh.
Well,
is there a better description that
I think
does capture?
Pittsburgh's were borrowed for inclusion in this. And the main reason that I picked up on that is because in at least one of the criteria, Pittsburgh was still referenced as opposed to the city of Erie. And yes, I guess, again, just proposing a consolidation of criteria so that they can be brought. I mean, we can also, should we wish, to provide examples or explain for the general public, right, what each of those criteria mean, what may fall under each of those criteria, we could provide that in the instructions for the nomination form. But leave them broad in the actual ordinance so that it, again, allows for us to catch as much as possible.
Yeah.
So, I actually read Kathy's statement, and usually I agree with her. In this case, I don't necessarily agree with her because I think that the smaller number of criteria, again, allows for a greater broadness, whereas the list of 15 to 20 criteria is very specific. It leads to specificity, and can be clearer for the general public, right? When you're actually listing 15 different types of resources that are eligible for local nomination or local designation. Yeah, in any case, I've set it off.
Okay.
Go ahead.
That sounds good. No, you're good. If you want to go ahead and make a motion, I was just asking a simple question. Okay.
Okay, we'll make a motion to hold a special work study session or special meeting, whatever you want to call it, between now and the next HRC meeting to review and finalize the criteria that we wish to include in Article 7.
I'll second.
All right, moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Nays? Abstentions? Unanimous. Thank you. I believe that we have, per the ordinance, very specific requirements around when we can hold a special session with advance notice. So I defer to Director Spry to kind of guide us through when we can find time to meet and space and that we're meeting that obligation. All right. Well, while we're on the topic of special meetings, our second kind of order of business is meeting to discuss the HRC's 2025 goals and priorities. Is that something, Director, that you wish to speak to?
Not at this time. I don't have anything prepared yet. Our focus has been around the amendments, and with the lack of a staff member, it's something that we need to put in for the next meeting for sure.
Okay.
So we will look to the historic preservation plan and come with maybe a set of priorities and goals to look at for the next meeting in March.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I know we talked last time about the preservation plan and what's been completed, what's coming next. So I think we have to decide what we want to focus on next. But wasn't there a report that described what's been completed out of the preservation plan, or what's being worked on, or whatever?
Per the ordinance or your bylaws, are you required to have an annual? I can't remember if you're required to have an annual report, and if that was ever completed for last year.
We're not required to, but it is best practice to have a kind of year in review, and especially something that we can send up to council and to the mayor's office as well, so they kind of can see holistically what we've done. Typically, it's up to staff to help move that forward, but I know that we went through a transition in December. It was probably very unlikely to have happened.
Well, I think we could do a small recap for next meeting, just to, I mean, there were several things that happened last year, and there were certainly a few designations. The website has been updated with the designations.
Great.
Because we just had 2 that were approved at council. But there may have been a report that was done by Heather, or at least something that she started that I feel like I've also seen that in the files, and we'll look through that and be able to bring that to you for March.
Yeah, great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes.
Well, in transitioning into the next order of business, then, you had mentioned that City Council has approved the old Customs House in the Erie Day School for historic designation.
Yes, both of those passed and were fully approved, and were, the designations were listed on the website. Both, I think there were two areas that IT put it, but for sure it's on our Historic Preservation Program site. The applicants reached out to us asking if they should attend any other meetings. We told them that for the second reading, most likely, just please stand by. But other than that, we don't have any kind of formal process of letting them know, other than email, that they've been, it's been adopted. So I know there was some discussion around that, of possibly sending out some type of formal letter or something from the city saying that you are now a locally designated historic site. So I don't know if that's something that you have to vote upon, or that it's an administrative function that we'd like to put in place, but they should receive something. And, I know we talked about the plaque. That should most likely be in this kind of letter packet, that if they would like to, purchase or go that route, that we have specs for it. We can help them work through that process.
I think that we do have that for new business, so.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
I'm
that's
jumping
okay.
ahead, Matthew. I'm sorry.
It's good. It's all very good. All right then, but thank you for the confirmation there. And then
Yes.
after second reading from council, the legislation that goes to the mayor's office for final signature, is that correct? Or
I was wondering that. I'm not exactly sure where that lies and
Okay.
who gets that. I'm assuming it's I don't know. I need to find that out. Because, in fact, Cooper, do you know if the files of the other designations are in Heather's files, or where do they go? Do we know? Jason knows.
The mayor would sign an ordinance, and the ordinance would direct the appropriate city official to make the change. And essentially, this whole process is you're actually rezoning
Oh, that's right.
one parcel. So then what happens is that the appropriate city official then would either be the
That's
zoning department, and then they would then update the city zoning map, so there are these two new parcels.
That's right. And,
Historic overlay over top of the
yes.
regular district that they're in. And so I think that's essentially what happened.
And that's already occurring, actually. I know that our GIS administrator's already working on putting the overlay district for those two sites. So it must have come through the mayor's office already.
I think that's actually happened with your house, because your house got the sort of designation. I think I've ever seen with the ordinance directing the proper city official to rezone it as a historic building. I think that's enough.
good to know the machinations of the process. So, yeah, thank you.
So that is happening, though, currently.
Great.
But I need to find out where those documents lie, and they probably should be with us, or with the mayor's office, or with the clerks. City clerks, okay.
I think what they do is they did send copies, like the solicitor's office gets a copy, and the administration gets a copy, and then I think the zoning office will get a copy. So it's just directing them to complete a certain action. And then zoning has, file on every property in the city, so it would go in there, and something came up for that property later down the road, that paperwork or ordinance would then be part of the zoning officer's file. You say something 50 years from now, they should have that in their file.
And when the zoning officer makes a change to a property, do they notify the property owner? So once the ordinance is passed, right, and the change is made within the zoning map,
That I don't know specifically.
Okay.
Because, I mean, because in our cases, the two that just got approved, you know, the owner
They were
is
the
part of the
applicant.
process, and the owner
Right.
knows that there's gonna be that historic
Mm-hmm,
zone overlap. Now, whether they get like a piece of paper in the mail or an email, that I don't know. That might actually be better coming from the HRC.
mm-hmm,
Saying, hey, the process is complete, here's our fancy letterhead.
Right.
Congratulations, it's been a long process, but we did it.
reference the ordinance.
Or it's in a copy, it's usually 1 or 2 pages.
Mm-hmm.
You know, do that too, yeah.
All right, then, we'll get there in just a second.
Okay.
But moving on to new business then, this is very similar to kind of what we did for COAs above, that if anything is done over the counter, we need a space on our agenda for report for COA, and for the same for nominations, and if there are any COAs before us. So the next order of new business is hearing and action for historic nominations. We, I believe, are in receipt of no
There are
new
not.
historic nominations. And so then we move on to hearing and action for applications for certificate of appropriateness. I assume there also,
There
we
are
have no
none.
applications?
None.
All right. Moving on to item C, scope of work to prepare a National Register of Historic Places district nomination for downtown Erie.
Thank you. Over the last couple of weeks, we've been having discussions with the state regarding a National Register of Historic Places district nomination for downtown, which was in PA share currently as Lower State Street. I believe it was 3rd to 8th. We have expanded that to be a larger part of downtown, and we're looking at even adding a few additional properties and areas to this expansion, that we do not have to go through any formal, at this time, formal process to expand what is currently in PA share and already determined as a site or as a district. But when we draft the RFP, that we would have the proposal address this expansion of a larger district. That being said, we've been talking with Erie Downtown Partnership about how we would fund this designation, because as I'm aware, it is a very detailed and intense process to have this type of nomination and or application, and really requires a consultant to prepare it. So we've been talking with the state, and the state has sent us examples of RFPs. The Erie Downtown Partnership has some money that they would be willing to match to submit an RFP and pay for this type of application. I have spoken to Emily Fetchko and also Erie Downtown Development Corporation, and said that I would go in front of the Redevelopment Authority's board to see if possibly we could use a portion of the funds from the Historic Building and Improvement Grant to match the funds that Erie Downtown Partnership would put forth. It is the understanding that the cost would be anywhere between $30,000 and $40,000. We could wait to apply for a CLG grant, which would take possibly another year. If we went ahead and did it through this type of funding source, then we could have the RFP potentially up next week. That was a way to not only allow properties to be eligible for tax credits, but I call it catapulting the historic preservation program, because it would bring a lot of awareness to historic preservation. It would I think, change the dynamic a little bit or understanding of what preservation is in the city of Erie. And also, hopefully with the support of EDDC and other property owners, supporting this initiative and encouraging the private sector to understand and participate in the process. Even though we don't necessarily need the private sector or engagement really to submit an application. But it is encouraged and it's best practice to have an open process. I hope that was a good explanation of what's going on, because there's been a lot of back and forth. And I know that this is not the first discussion, that this has been talked about for some time. I know that as far back as, 10 years ago maybe, that this
If not longer.
downtown district has been discussed, and we just happen to keep moving forward with these conversations. And I was hoping to prepare and have something ready for the Redevelopment Authority next Monday, which is when they meet with Emily. Now, I don't know if I need a formal approval from the HRC for that, to request that money. It is currently in the Redevelopment Authority's funds, but I don't know if that's something that we would want to take a vote on formally, requesting that money be used to match the amount given by Erie Downtown Partnership.
It certainly wouldn't hurt to have an endorsement of the plan.
Probably not.
Yeah. That's pretty wonderful, I think. And especially that it sounds like this has really kind of grown organically out of the community's interest and some of the partnerships that I know the city has downtown. And I think that when the community is specifically asking for something related to historic preservation, it's always good to support them. So
Yes.
that's, I'm really interested to, I think, learn more about the process and to see exactly how this is going to unfold. But it sounds like you've done a lot of work behind the scenes to bring us to this point.
Mostly coordinating, just coordinating people together. There's, I know this has been, and I know this has already been determined by the state, and others had worked on it previously. So just trying to coordinate people to work together and move the process along. But I also was going to mention about the expansion of the district. I'm happy to share that with the HRC and the RFP before we post. Certainly could share all those materials with you. It just sort of quickly quickly the discussion became more of a reality, and I knew I was going to be giving you an update at this meeting. So that's where I'm at in terms of the RFP process. Erie Downtown Partnership has a very good relationship with Bill Callahan at the state, and they have been very supportive, and I think she's ready to, and her board has allowed her, she's able to proceed without having to go back to her board as well, and so the timing just seems to be good. It's just that I'm not sure with the funds that we have, which is around 327,000 left in that historic building and improvement grant, just making sure that we're using those funds the way that the HRC would like. So.
Jackie, question, was Bill's the one that's talking about the area, the designation of what area? Because I know we talked a while ago about down there.
Yes.
On Lower State, and now it's coming up, I guess, why is it stopping at a certain point? There's been a lot of discussion about extending it and the reasons why.
Right. Originally it had stopped, and Melinda, you also were involved, so you can speak to this too. Originally, it stopped at 8th Street. There was discussion around, especially 10th Street, and the amount of investment being made at 10th and State, and also the historic properties between Peach and State. You have the YMCA, the telephone building, the Meisner building. So the amount of historic properties there, and then we continued to move upstate and realized that we have other properties that could be included into that into the district. So I really kind of just was advised by Bill as to which ones to include along state. That doesn't necessarily mean that we could exclude, include. I mean, it really is up to us, I believe, what we want to put into the proposal. I've already gotten kind of the blessing of the polygon that we created, but we certainly could suggest other areas.
So
but the more,
yeah.
just to let you know, the more buildings that you put into the RFP, of course, that increases the cost as we add more properties into the building. That's how I understand it. Maybe I'm wrong with that, but
that it will increase the cost of the preparing of the nomination.
Yes.
If we talk about, so the expansion even to 8th Street was relatively new. That's only been in the last 2 to 3 years. So the original Lower State Street proposed historic district actually stopped at 6th Street.
okay.
So it's in the last 2 or 3 years, then it was moved to 8th to incorporate additional properties. But, I would advocate that again, if the HRC is allowed to participate in these discussions, that we look at a boundary, not just in terms of history, right, but in terms of economic what will encourage economic development, what will encourage the use of the historic tax credit programs, we have the CRIS now, right? So there are reasons for us to look at a boundary that aligns with all of those economic and development goals of the community going forward. So again, not just looking at history and old buildings, but really what makes the most sense for us to create opportunities for those who will be investing in those buildings and or currently own those buildings. So,
And I think that was the reasoning thank you, because that is precisely why we moved it up even first to
Yes,
10th,
yep.
because there's several buildings that potentially could come up for sale. And so that was the reasoning behind pushing that up to 10th Street. But then once we were up on 10th, we kept moving even more south. There were other opportunities, even 12th and State and so on. So yes, that's a great point, that it's not just about the historic building itself, but the potential for investment, for sure, and economic development. And there may be room for others there. I don't know if that's something that we could possibly, the meeting is on Monday. I don't have to have exact boundaries, but I would like, if we're going to expand it further or add additional properties, we just need to kind of understand what our cost range would be, And maybe we only ask for a certain amount from the redevelopment authority and leave it at that, and then we find other funding elsewhere if that's what is preferable.
So it depends, though, because Commissioner Meyer's point, you're quite right that we have CRIS now, and a lot of what goes into putting together a nomination like that is building inventory, so that we have a lot of very recent information that a contractor or consultant would be able to use towards creating a district expansion. But if it is a district expansion, it will need to meet the criteria that's already been established for the existing district. That's tricky. So we would need to pull up the original National Register nomination and any kind of addendums that have already gone through the process and see exactly what kind of argument was made, because through the expansion process, if a different argument would need to be made to kind of include everything that the community and the HRC wishes to include, that could get quite expensive. So definitely getting an understanding, I think, of what has happened before and what we can build on versus creating something new is kind of integral to putting together an RFP process for it. But I mean, potentially, though, there's quite a bit of work that's already been done by a different consulting team and the building inventory, which is going to make the overall process easier.
And currently, in the footprint that we have approximately 60 buildings. 60 buildings in the expansion, district expansion to, it's
12.
not quite to 12th Street. It's really to the, on the on the eastern side, it's to the parking lot before the bank on 12th and State. So it goes all the way up through Plymouth and the next building.
This is, though, an interesting time. So so the original lower State Street footprint included the oldest buildings on State Street, right? So we're talking about the 1830s through 1880s, 1890s. And so at the time, there was that 2-block expansion. It was felt it was legitimate because several of those buildings that were in that 2-block expansion, quite frankly, were already listed individually on the National Register, so why not include them? So I guess in thinking about, because, and I don't know if it's appropriate for me to say this now, but I really would like us to think about the benefits and potential of extending the boundary even farther south on State Street, because there are some really incredible buildings right beyond 12th. So we have Union Station, Griswold Plaza, the Turnpike Building, PACA, which is already individually listed, the building where the current post office is, the building where Keller's is. We have then across the tracks, not just PACA, but we have the Manacor. And then we have kind of just past the Manacor, there's a vacant lot, and then there's like the last series of probably late 19th, early 20th century buildings. So depending on how this plays out, we could actually look at a district that would go from 4th National Register district, which is honorary only, not regulatory, right? We could look at a district from Modern Tool up to 18th Street potentially. Again, if it all jives. If not, we can allocate funding to this project, but at the same time, I would task us to think about, if we do stop a National Register district, again, not a local district, National Register, if we do stop it at 12th, is it worth looking at the next portion as a separate district? Mm-hmm. And not do that in 3 years or 4 years, but look at that as a project that is happening simultaneous with the first 12 blocks, because there could be a different justification. So if you look at Griswold Plaza and you look at Union Station and you look at the PACA building and some of the other, again, 4 to 5 story buildings in that area, you could actually weave a different story. There would be different justification for those buildings. So, you know, they could potentially be a separate and distinct nomination. But I think it's worth having all of these discussions ahead of time, especially since you're proposing to seek funding from RACE, because yeah, in any case, I just think it's worth a discussion.
So have a strategy.
Yes,
Instead of
yes.
just shooting.
And instead of just shooting, yes.
I
Director.
think what I'd like to do, if you're okay with this, is that I'd like to speak to the state and ask what the recommendation would be, considering, you know, we've expanded quite a bit. And I've also asked EDR, our consultants on the Historic Resource Survey, to provide me with what they would propose as for an estimate, so that I have at least one estimate, you know, of a consultant. Dave, maybe you have any idea, that would be great, but they have done several applications for nominations, so they said that they would get that to me, just so I have some kind of range.
Yeah.
But I'd like to speak with the state, with Bill, and then I can relay the message as to kind of what the recommendations are. But I can understand if we're requesting allocation of funding, we have funding, and, you know, is it best to just do it all at one time and ask for additional funds, you know, see if we can get others to possibly contribute? You know, I understand the reasoning behind that. But if it's problematic to expand that much, and they're, you know, that's not their recommendation, then I would think that we would do that separately. Okay.
It's the whole block also, right? We're not talking just State Street. It's the whole block? To
It's
French?
properties. It's not necessarily by block.
Okay.
It's looked at by properties. So there's even with the polygon, and I'll send it to you after this meeting. The way that it's done, it's like incorporates sometimes a building on the corner, but it doesn't incorporate the entire block.
Okay, right.
Well, and if it were to extend, again, if it were to extend beyond the railroad tracks, which again, I like, because I feel like that particular section of the city they are outside of the Erie Downtown Partnership's footprint, so they do not benefit from their resources, right? So, you know, it's like being on the other side of the tracks. It's that metaphor. So I like the idea of us looking at that for potential inclusion, but if the boundary were to extend that far, I think there would be probably 2 or 3 blocks where it would only be one side of the street. Quite frankly, there would be a boundary that would meander up and down the street to include the most relevant and historic buildings that have the strongest integrity, and of course tie to the justification for the district.
Right. So moving forward, it sounds like what is in order is a recommendation from the HRC, and to include a letter that the director would be able to take with her to the race meeting next Monday. So may I have a motion from the commission to support Director Spry's the pursuit of a National Register of Historic Places district nomination for downtown Erie?
I'll make a motion to support the discussion to move forward with a designation of the Downtown Historic District.
Okay. I will second and call the question. All in favor? Say aye.
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 Thank you.
Abstentions or opposition? Hearing none, motion carries unanimously. We'll get you a letter.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next order of new business is our CHRS update.
Yes, We've been in contact twice now. We have our bi-weekly meetings with EDR, our consultants, and they have uploaded, I believe, all of downtown and 12th Street into PA Share, and they were working on the portion of our West Bayfront neighborhood, and they hope to have that in shortly. I have an email out to our contact at the state to go through the information with us and see if there's anything that we need to change. I'm not exactly sure what that review process looks like or how I can be of assistance, but I plan to sit down with Elizabeth Schultz and work through that. So they're moving forward, even though the weather is not cooperating with us, because they hope to be back in February, in the middle part or end of February, to be back in our West Bayfront neighborhood and then continue down the list of neighborhoods in order that they have. We have told them at the last biweekly meeting, we plan to help with the outreach still, even though that funding is already expended. The funding for the first phase of this project, which was engagement, it's expended, and that CLG grant is closed out. It is our due diligence and our charge to continue to bring awareness and make sure that the neighborhoods are aware. We have also had discussions with Melinda, and I think, Matthew, I know that you weren't able to make that meeting, but we had a very good discussion about strategizing around continuing to provide education and awareness about the project. And we're going to be meeting with Melinda again. Our staff, we're going to come up with a schedule and a bit of a strategy for engagement, and then hopefully the HRC can help with this, and maybe some of the other partners with Preservation Erie and others that would continue to keep the energy alive with this project. So we're not finished with it in terms of the engagement piece, and we certainly have to keep the neighborhoods engaged and drive people to the story map. So that is very much alive and will continue even though there's not funding allowed for it. They hope to be back in the field in mid-February and continue to keep going as long as they can see foundations. If they can't see the foundation, then they're not coming back to Erie. So they can't see the foundation right now.
Some things are beyond our power.
That's right. So they've been very good at keeping in communication with us, and they continue to do the background work.
Great.
That's the completion of my report.
Okay, thank you. Our next order of business is the new landmark recognition letter, and I think we've throughout the course of this meeting kind of covered a lot of ground on it already. It seems like some kind of formal recognition is needed for those who have gone through the landmarking process successfully. And we have an opportunity, I think, to fill that role as an HRC by putting some standardized letter together, or verbiage rather together for a letter to those that have successfully made it through the process. I wondered whether or not there's any opportunity to kind of, kind of piggyback on a process that may already exist within the city. I don't know whether or not like proclamations are ever done by city council. If there's any kind of letter, like a kind of formal recognition letter that has a little bit of formality to it that somebody might frame, hang, that kind of thing.
Matthew, if you would like, we have Jason Check, our solicitor here. Maybe, Jason, you could come up to the podium just to, if you want, to answer the question, because he's more familiar with these processes than I am, and maybe could answer the question quickly.
Sure.
I mean, your first question first, does the city or the city council do proclamations? Mm-hmm. The answer is absolutely yes. They just had one at their last city council meeting where Kathy Schaaf did a proclamation recognizing a group that did mental health, I believe, with juvenile clients. And that lady came and did a little description of what they do in the community and what they're trying to do. And there was a proclamation after that. So how do they do that? Second question, do they do that for like historic stuff? Not that I know of, but I do know that Kathy Schaffa being on city council, is very supportive of the Historic Review Commission. And I think that if we probably approached her, I'm sure she would probably gladly want to do something for that property or the owner, would be my thought. I mean, anything, and plus it would also help spread. I think one of your guys' purposes is education about the historic review process and the benefits of historic review. So I think I would just reach out to Kathy Schaff. I feel like she's probably the most excited about it.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
No, you're welcome.
Having done 20 proclamations on city council, a council member could put together a proclamation for anything that they think is a valuable contribution to the city or something that's moving us forward. So absolutely.
It sounds like a kind of worthwhile pursuit. I mean, I think that our options are kind of looking to do something internally and kind of creating a new process, or already use an existing process. And
Yeah.
It sounds like a proclamation with city council might be the kind of easiest way to not reinvent the wheel.
I would suggest just a communication from the HRC or from Jackie recommending it, and if Kathy knows about it, then if she's the council person who would like to do that, of course, any council member could step up and do a proclamation. So I think just some type of simple communication, and then city council could take it from there.
Okay. With that, then, I look at Director Spry, whose plate is already overly full. Would you care to reach out to the council member? I could if you would need a hand.
I'm happy to do that. I was planning on reaching out to Kathy anyways regarding our amendment change as well. So I'm happy to ask her what the formal process is internally, and then how she would like me to proceed when we have a designation. And right after the designation has been approved, then we would do the proclamation. Is that correct?
Yes.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Okay. But then we also want to send out a formal letter on letterhead stating that you are now within our, what are we calling it?
Our club.
Our club, yeah. Our club, but we have our list, our categorized list.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Perhaps if we're looking at to bleed over into F on our agenda, recognition of May, which is Historic Preservation Month. Perhaps there's an opportunity to use that month as to orchestrate with City Council to acknowledge all of the folks that have gone through the process in the course of a year. And I know in this year there's several that have gone through, and maybe even those that have in years past gone through the process and not had that recognition. We might look at those as well as something that we could do to honor and celebrate all of the folks that have gone through this process already. All right. But to continue on that, are there any other thoughts around either the letter for recognition or the kind of May as Historic Preservation Month? Is there any kind of other, I know we're very limited in bandwidth, but anything else that we might like to look to that month to kind of raise the profile of the work that the HRC and the staff have done for historic preservation in the city? Anything like that?
So depending on when you wanted the annual report to go out, we may wish to hold the annual report until May, and or use that as a time to really highlight the HRC's work, and maybe not just 2024, but since its inception. Right? I suspect that will also be a time, I don't know if we probably didn't write it into the contract with EDR, but I think that would be an interesting time also to provide the public with an update on the survey. Maybe hold some type of public program where we talk about the survey work to date, what they found, what they're most excited about as outsiders looking in at the city of Erie and its historic resources. At that point, depending on whether or not the National Register nomination moves forward, that could also be an important time for some early public meetings around a potential National Register nomination for State Street, whatever that proposed boundary could be. Those are some general ideas that align with our current priorities.
I like all those ideas. Just going back to the letter for one moment, I don't know if the HRC has a formal letterhead. If not, it's easy enough for me to make that with the mayor and then the HRC on the bottom. So I can do that, and then would you like me to draft the letter and then send it out, or would you like to draft the letter and then send it to me? How would you like, or we can work together? I'm happy to do that. We have priority at this moment is working through some of the edits for the amendment, and then the next thing is working through the bylaws and also the forms. So we can certainly add in, I mean, the letter won't be too difficult, just get it on formal letterhead. But then the internal process I would like to write down as our internal process and have it as our policy, or procedures, I should say, as our procedures. So I'm happy to work through all of that with guidance from the HRC. And I like the idea of holding off on the annual report till May. That will give us a little bit of extra time. But I still think we need to come with priorities for you at the next meeting.
Agreed. Commissioner Meyer, did you have? It's all right if not.
No, it was a certificate. So I know you talked about the proclamation, right?
Forms?
Well, no, I don't want to create any speed bumps. I guess I'm just wondering, proclamations are cool. They're also super huge. Can we just do an 8.5 by 11 certificate?
Yeah.
That goes with the letter?
Yeah.
That can be frameable? Okay.
Well, let's do this then. To wrap up formally, item E, which is the new landmark recognition letter, is there a motion to adopt a landmark recognition letter? Please.
I'll make a motion to adopt a recognition letter.
All right. I will second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstain? All right, we are formally charged. As for, I think, the process, we'll continue to work with you on it. We know your plate runneth over.
Okay. Thank you.
I think that we've had a lot of good brainstorming around item F, which is recognition of Historic Preservation Month. Commissioner Mayer brought up some excellent points about, I think, the annual review, and also looking forward into 2025, as well as maybe some other things we can plan in that wouldn't be too much of an impact on time or budget. So that brings us to item G, which is Historic Preservation Program Editorial. And I think that for that, I defer to Commissioner Meyer. Is that you as well?
So I want to be clear here, though, it feels a weird spot because I was actually proposing this not as a commissioner, but as Preservation Erie. So we may or may not want this to be on the agenda, but in any case, the idea was to And again, I know there's a separation, and so this is kind of an odd position to be in, but I was proposing an op-ed by Preservation Erie, which I was willing to write because we completed the survey in 2014 and had good public engagement then. And so the idea was to really speak to the community about how this current survey is different, why it is just as important, if not more important, the expanded reach of the survey, and really to drive, to encourage engagement. So to point people back to the city's story map, and to outline ways in which the community can be engaged in this process. As an advocacy organization, that's who again led the last survey work that was done. That's why I was proposing that. So it probably, again, I feel weird mentioning it, but because it's not as a commissioner, but as an advocacy organization who partners with the city. Yes.
I don't feel weird at all. It simply means we needn't take any action on it, but appreciate the briefing. So thank you. With that, we move on to item 6, which is Director's Report. Director Spry, is there anything else that you wish to brief us on for the inner workings of the Planning Department?
Just one other quick item is that I'll be reviewing the historic preservation, the position that's open. I'll be reviewing the applications this week. So we have a hold on it because we've received about 30 applications, which is excellent.
Oh.
So yes, that's really all I have other than what I already reported on throughout the meeting. So thank you.
Great, thanks. With that then, it brings us to the end of our meeting. So I would ask that for a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned.